Hello. In this video, which I think is going to definitely be an anti-Swami kind of video, um, I'm probably likely to piss off everyone at least a little bit, right? But I wanted to talk about, in the context of the Yi Dao, of the philosophical underpinnings of the I Ching. And if you're not aware, here's the Magician's I Ching, which is my version of the I Ching. Feel free to pick it up if you don't have it already. Check out the other videos in the Yifa Society playlist for more information on the I Ching, the nature of the I Ching, and the hexagrams of the I Ching. The I Ching has a cosmological framework that explains the nature of reality. And within that, it says a lot, because of reasons I'm going to explain, about the idea of gender. So you can see we're treading slightly dangerous territory here. Furthermore, you might already be familiar with the fact that in the kind of the traditional context of the Chinese cosmological, esoteric symbolism that emerged out of the I Ching, there's yin and yang, right? These two concepts that are usually interpreted directly as masculine and feminine. And so that sounds like a very binary kind of framework. And that's not quite the whole story. It is also the story, though. It's a big part of the story. So I don't want to, I'm kind of going to end up, like I said, I don't think anyone's going to be, if there's people that are on either side of the contemporary, modern debates on things like gender, I don't think anybody's going to be fully satisfied watching this video. But I'm going to try to explain the context of the cosmological system of the I Ching, which is also the foundation of all esoteric teaching of the Far East, right? Of Taoism and Confucianism, and Buddhism has even incorporated this, even though it wasn't originally from China. All Chinese and Japanese, all Asian Buddhism incorporates some of these concepts within it because of the importance of the I Ching. What it really says about this. So you probably are familiar, even if you've never read the I Ching or had anything to do with it, you probably are familiar with the idea of yin and yang, right? Feminine and masculine. Yang is masculine, yin is feminine. And you could say, well, that's that, right? But it's not just that, right? You're also probably familiar with the symbol that is often mistakenly called the Tao, which is meant to represent the whole with masculine and feminine within it, right? I'm just going to quickly draw it here, even though I'm sure you've seen it before. I'm going to do a really bad drawing of it because I am definitely not an artist. I know some great artists that would probably be appalled by my lack of artistic talent. All right, so let's say that's what you usually think of as the Tao, right? One side is all black, the other side is white. They have the two dots. There's a black dot on one side, a white dot on the other side. That's actually not called the Tao. That's the Taiji, which is a symbol of the most fundamental level of creation, right? The Chinese cosmological system describes several different layers to creation. And you can think of it as a hierarchy, as a tree, a top-down sort of descending concept, like the tree of life is in Western esotericism, in the Kabbalah and things like that. But it's actually much more practical to think of it as these layers that are underneath, right? That it builds up into what is now material reality at the very top, right? So you can talk, I am not a quantum woo guy, right? But you could say that it, like, the most fundamental building block levels of reality, you get to these forces, at the bottom of all of which is emptiness, which is woo, right? Space with no definition, right? And then above that, there is space with some kind of definition, where you can already say it's a thing. And then there is everything, right? All. That's the Taiji, which is the undivided Taiji, that it's just one thing. And then there's the Taiji that has within it yin and yang, which that's the symbol we usually think of as the Tao, right? And then beyond that, you see a division, the separation into two fundamental forces, which are yin and yang, right? So yang in the I Ching is depicted as a solid line, and that's the masculine, right? In the I Ching, yang is depicted as a line with a space in the middle, or a broken line, and that's yang. And one is the creative and the other is the receptive, right? One is the active and the other one's the passive, one is the light and one's the dark, black and white. So it says, we begin with this monadic universe, this whole universe where all is one, but we can't even comprehend that, right? We're completely incapable of understanding that, right? On an intellectual level. You can only understand it as a spiritual experience. But then that divides into a dualistic universe where everything is these dualistic opposites, right? Yes and no, black and white. And we are able to intellectually understand dualism, but there's nowhere in the world, there's two things you have to understand. First of all, there's nothing in the world within our ability to understand that is not derived from dualism. And yet at the same time, there's nothing in the world that's purely dualistic, right? Everything in the world is a product of a combination of a variety of opposed forces. But at the same time, we can't comprehend anything without that dualism underneath. And what I mean is that anything that we try to define positively, we can only define underneath, when you go down far enough, as a negative definition, as what it's not, as the opposite of something else. So if you can say, well, what's red? It's a color, right? Well, what's a color, right? A color is a visual experience, right? Well, what's a visual experience? Well, a visual experience is something that happens in the brain, blah, 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 blah. And then you go far enough back and you have to say, well, it's not an olfactory experience, right? It's not something else. What's black, right? Fundamentally, we can never have a definition of black that doesn't involve comparing it to something else and saying it's not that other thing, right? Usually white, right? So there's no, you can make a more complex description, but if you get down to the bare bones of it, somewhere in that there has to be it's not white, right? An apple is not an orange. You can also say an apple's not a tomato, right? But you can say a fruit is not a vegetable or whatever. But it has to be there at some level of our intellectual understanding. So that's why it's such a fundamental structure, right? And therefore, on one hand, this also can be seen to connect to this idea of these two fundamental basic biological genders that you see human beings have, right? Those are things that exist, obviously, right? And one of the traditional attributions, besides yin and yang as male and female, is the connection to the masculine and feminine reproductive organs, right? And more specifically, a connection to that in their form as trigrams, right? Which I'm about to get to. So our universe is more complex than just pure dualism, which means you have to add another level to it, right? And this is first added to a level called the Shijiang, which is a collection of two-line formats, which are these four basic forces in the universe. I'm not going to go into too much detail about those, except that they also aren't enough to encompass all phenomena, so you have to add a third line, right? And that's where you get into the 8 trigrams, the 3-line combinations. So the most basic trigrams you can conceive of are 3 yang lines, that is to say the most masculine of trigrams, right? Which is typically translated as heaven or creation or something like that, but it's also can be perfectly translated as the phallus, right? And then the world trigram, which is 3 yin lines, right? The ultimate feminine, right? The receptive, which can also be translated as the yoni, right? the female reproductive organ. But those two extremes of those of the trigrams inevitably intermingle as you get into more layers of reality. There's nothing that's just pure yang at our level, because at the very least it's multiplied yang, right? And then when the trigrams, when those forces interact, you produce other trigrams. So you'll have some trigrams that have more feminine forces than masculine forces, right? So for example, if you have one yang line above and then two yang lines below, that's the symbol for earth or for mountain, which has more feminine lines than masculine lines, right? Or if you have, let's say, just to give another couple of examples of the 8 trigrams, you have 2 solid lines and then a broken line in the middle, so 2 yang and 1 yin, and that's the trigram for the sun, which is more masculine than feminine, right? And if you did it the opposite way, if you had like 2 broken lines and a solid line in the middle, that's the moon. So these are more complex building blocks. These are the 8 elements of creation. And then combinations of different trigrams come together to form the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. So we can understand on one level that there is an awful lot of important concept to yin and yang, and that you could say that in a very general sense, this connects to these kind of 2 most archetypal gender concepts of the male and the female, right? And there's a lot of good reasons why it does, because this is kind of shored up by history and throughout different cultures. So you can't say it's just a cultural product, right? It's a product of human nature because it exists in different versions and different variations. Not everything does, right? Because, for example, I don't know, the preference of certain colors, right? Pink wasn't thought of as a particularly feminine color even in our culture until very recently, until about the late 19th or early 20th century, I think. But in a lot of other things, it does, right? And it ties to elements of biology. It ties to, the fact that biological males are generally stronger than, on average. There are stronger women, but they're on the average male is going to be stronger than the average female. And that biological women have to be, or have the potential to be mothers, and that there are a whole bunch of elements to human, physiology and to the psychology of even hormonal effects that create certain personality traits. So these are all things that are there. But what it also teaches at the same time is that every human being a part of the world of 10,000 things, which is to say the world of those 64 hexagrams, has some combination of yin and yang within them, right? Everyone has both of those forces within them. Everyone has elements of the masculine energy and the feminine energy within them. There's no one that's so masculine that they have no feminine force within them, or if they did, they would in some way be defective, because that's not a complete human being, and vice versa, right? So there are complexities to this element of gender in the context of the universal cosmology as explained by the I Ching, in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. Well, I mean, because it's a reflection of reality, right? The I Ching is a cosmology that very accurately reflects reality as a whole and the psychology of the human experience, which is why it has endured for more than 3,000 years, why it's been so long lasting and so effective, right? It's been very successful at that, not just because of some kind of like spiritual backing, because it's not, some kind of a text about God, right, or something like that, but because it has elements to it that work as instruction, as ethical instruction, as philosophical instruction, and as cosmological instruction, right, as an instruction of how things are. So it's a really significant book of wisdom that is very different than most other books of wisdom of great age, in that it actually predates the great Chinese religions and contributed to the creation of great Chinese religions. But there's what it does say within that reality is that there very much is a spectrum of gender. Right? I don't think that spectrum, though, is something that you can also just define, because what it says, first of all, is that there is something that is coherently feminine and coherently masculine. That we also, all of us, have some element of that consistently feminine, consistently masculine quality within us. So that these are real things and that they're really within us. And that all of us have some combination of both. And that these aren't the same throughout our lives. As we change, you can see as we go through time, just like as in time, at different moments of time and space, different hexagrams, different situations, different combinations of yin and yang manifest around us in the world. Obviously, because we are part of the world, different combinations of yin and yang manifest within us in the context of our lives, right? So not only is gender kind of a spectrum, but it's a spectrum you can't just pin down. You can't, this idea that there are, a certain number, whether it's 2 or 50 definable genders, and that someone is stuck in that mold for their entire life, is actually what I think is the real problem here. It's not the idea that there's more than 2 genders. It's, first of all, the suggestion that idea means that there isn't also definable biological realities to the male and the female self, right? That's a problem. But another problem is the idea that those genders are definable and absolute, and something that is not mobile, right? And that therefore become a hugely important part of one's own self-definition in a way that you're not supposed to change, right? And I understand why that's happened in recent history. Because in part there are people saying that these things aren't real and that they can be changed, by force or something like that. So there's a reluctance to suggest that in fact gender is a hell of a lot more fluid than we want it to be, or than that maybe that either side wants it to be, right, in this kind of debate. But maybe that's also a perspective to have in order for a pragmatic way forward, right? To say, well, that actually. And this ancient wisdom kind of presents a view of the universe that suggests that our gender is not only more than a binary choice, but that it's also mutable, right? And it's mutable by effects happening outside in us and by things happening inside in us, right? And that this can be something that can happen to us or that we can participate in. So again, I don't think anyone's going to be really happy with my conclusion about that subject. But this is, from my perspective, what the I Ching kind of reveals, and what the structure, that very coherent cosmology that the I Ching has, presents. And you don't have to believe me, obviously. You shouldn't believe me. You should study the I Ching yourself and see about how you can apply it in your life, and see if that actually does something, or if that perspective does something that helps clarify things in your life, or in some way make you able to be better for yourself or for the world by trying out that perspective and seeing what that means, right? And seeing what that means about how you look at yourself and how you look at other people and how you look at the world. So don't trust me on this, right? But let it percolate in your own heads for a while. That's everything for today. If you found this video interesting, please check out the rest of my channel, subscribe, check out in particular the Yi Fa Society playlist, which talks more about the I Ching and about the Yi Dao, the deeper esoteric teachings within the I Ching. And if you're interested in a system of self-cultivation and self-transformation that you can work in with a structured curriculum for your self-transformation, look into the Yi Fa Society. Get in touch with me about that. And if you're not sure about that, but you're just interested in more teachings and more information, then sign up to my newsletter. It's a free newsletter. You'll get a couple of emails a couple of emails a month. Sorry, you will not get flooded with emails. You'll get a couple of emails a month that will show links to my other teachings on social media, or that will present some kind of a special original content just for subscribers. And you'll get a free PDF copy of The Path and the Power, which is my new interpretation and commentary on the Tao Te Ching, which is a very good companion volume if you already have The Magician's I Ching. So be sure to subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. And be sure to subscribe to the channel. And feel free to share this video anywhere you like. Hopefully, hopefully in places where people might actually benefit from it, and not necessarily just to generate controversy for its own sake. But I know that can be difficult. So do what thou wilt.